Set the screenshot. Hi, everybody. It's Joe Cioffi here. Sorry I had to push it back a little bit. I was having there's all sorts of technical issues going on with the weather websites being busy. Hope the audio is fine. Just let me know if somebody could just post that the audio is okay. I would really appreciate it. And hello to everybody that's on board this evening. We've got so much going on with regards to Harvey, which is making a move now and getting some hope that there will be some good news with regards to the rain in Houston. And in fact, I'm going to jump over to the Houston radar, and you can see on the latest radar, let me see if I can just freshen this up a little bit. See if we can get the latest one. There we go. And the rains are actually tapering off on the western side in the Houston. There's still some rain there from Houston to Galveston, but the heavy rain has now shifted into East Texas. So that's good news there. And as Harvey is moving, you can see where the center is, this arc, and the counterclockwise turning. So the center moving steadily northeastward now. So some progress is being made that finally the torrential rains, maybe the last round of torrential rain has occurred, keeping our fingers crossed that something else doesn't gel up overnight on the west side. But at least from that standpoint, we're seeing some improvement. And we'll pop up the eastern two-thirds of the United States. So there's Harvey, and there's the very broad center that's still so obvious on the satellite loop. And here's our nor'easter, the tropical cyclone, that potential tropical cyclone that never met potential, now becoming an old-fashioned mid-fall nor'easter, moving off the Virginia, North Carolina coast and heading to the east-northeast, right on schedule. So that's good. And while we do have some rain going on over parts of the northeast, and I'll show you on the some of the local radars. Here's the New York City radar that, let me freshen this up. And the back edge of the rain now, they're doing some, there we go. There's the back edge of the rain. I guess they had some problems there. So let me just jump over to the Philadelphia radar, and we'll freshen this one up for you, and hopefully we'll be okay. New York City, you can see the line goes from just north of Philadelphia and Trenton to New York City on up to about the Connecticut coast. Still getting some rain on Long Island and some heavier rain over the east end, and rain down through central and southern New Jersey, particularly south of Route 195 and south of the Turnpike. But overnight, this is all going to shift to the east, and we're going to see some gradual improvement to a much better day on Wednesday. And today, it barely got out of the low to mid 60s. What a raw day it was. But much better weather is coming for Wednesday. But we've got changes, including a quick shot of very chilly air, relatively speaking, coming in late Thursday night and lasting into early Saturday. The remnants of Harvey look like we're going to get some rain from that, maybe on the order of an inch or two, or maybe on the order of an inch or two or three in some places. Later Saturday night into Sunday morning. And then Labor Day looks good. And we do have more tropical issues. There's the system off the African coast that's developing, and we'll move to the west, and we're going to have many days to watch that. But there's also the possibility, as some models indicate, that there's going to be lower than normal pressures in the Gulf of Mexico over the next several days and through the weekend, and it's possible that another tropical system could come out of the Southwest Gulf. And it doesn't have to be anything much. It could be even as weak as just a tropical wave. If it winds up lifting northwestward and bringing more rain to the Texas coast, that is not good. So any kind of development there, whatever it is, be it a depression or a tropical storm or just a tropical wave, not a good thing. So we're going to take a look at that, and we're going to take a look at the long range. So just sit tight, and here we go. Let's begin with the surface analysis this evening with Tropical Storm Harvey as it continues to move northeastward, heading for the southwest coast of Louisiana. The good news is that it's moving, and we've seen actually some gusts of 60 miles an hour at times along the Texas coast today as that center started to reform a bit, and we had a burst of convection on the northern semicircle. So that created some strong winds along the coast. One of the things that's happened this afternoon is that, at least from the standpoint just west of Houston, we're seeing the back edge of the rain beginning to taper down a bit, and the heavy rains have now shifted to extreme southeastern Texas toward the Louisiana border into southwestern Louisiana, and they're going to be getting more heavy rains tonight as that center makes its approach and comes ashore during the day on Wednesday. So the thing is, everything is moving, and that's the good news here. We're seeing that the Harvey is getting pulled northeastward by the upper trough that is causing the nor'easter along the mid-Atlantic coast today, that is moving out also to the northeast. And we're going to get to that in a second. But this evening, we've got gusts of 45 in a few stations. We see some sustained winds of 40 miles an hour popping up. The winds have actually kind of tapered down just a little bit from their peaks earlier today. Here's the satellite loop, and you can see the center here. There's that northern burst of thunderstorms that occurred right on the northern edge of the center. It's kind of getting pulled away now to the northeast, as most of that higher and colder cloud tops are on land. And this is where we're getting the heavy rains this evening. And notice the western edge, not that far away. So hopefully they can finally see the bulk of the heavy rains pull out, and the surge that they got last night and this morning is going to be the final one. Here is the Lake Charles radar, and you can see where the center is now, fairly far offshore, east of Galveston, south of Beaumont. And here's Lake Charles here, moving northeastward. So southwest Louisiana is where the center is coming across, but there's that concentration of heavy rain in extreme southeastern Texas and parts of southwestern Louisiana. The rainfall, excessive. That area of 25 plus inches expands even more. As I've been saying, I wish there was a color for something higher, because we should, we'd see a 40 and 50 degree delineation here. 50-inch delineation here with all the rain that has come down. Just an absolutely phenomenal event. Here's our nor'easter, and there's the center, void of any shower and thunderstorm activity. There's activity out to the east. There's activity out up to the north and east, but all of this is now sliding east-northeastward as advertised, and this system is going to intensify as it moves northeastward, but its opportunity to become tropical has pretty much passed, so this is going to just deepen as a gale center as it moves away. And here's the rain with that, as it begins now to slide slowly eastward off the coast. It should be ending from west to east during the overnight, and we do have improving weather conditions that are coming for sure. Let me just show you the profile of the upper air of the late afternoon GFS model. We'll start with the initial panel. So there's that trough, there's Harvey. Here's the little representation of what is the coastal system, and this upper air trough through the Great Lakes, of course, exerting its influence all the way around. It's flattening out, as was as advertised by the models, which is why the coastal storm is moving out to the northeast. But it was a little bit stronger, and just enough to grab Harvey and pull it up northeastward. So rather than having it get left behind, as some models were indicating earlier in the week. Now that moves out. And here we have a second trough that dives in. This is the cold front for late Thursday that's going to bring a shot of autumn air, real cool air up into New England and the Northeast. We're going to see the coolest air that we've had since back in early June. 30s and 40s are going to be common up in parts of interior New England with this. And we're going to see some rather cool temperatures here Friday into Saturday morning. And there's Harvey just kind of inching along and lifting up to the northeast, because here comes another trough that's swinging down out of Canada, and that's going to pick it up and bring it through here with some rain. When I say here, I'm talking about the southern New England, New York, New Jersey, eastern Pennsylvania, Long Island, down to Maryland and Delaware, and south central PA. We're going to get into some rain, the remnants of Harvey. And I think it might be the kind of thing, it's going to depend on how much of a core is left in terms of that tropical moisture. Sometimes with these remnants, you could get a really fast several-inch rainfall, but I certainly think a 1 to 2 inch rainfall is possible with this. Now, going forward into next week, an even deeper trough. We've been mentioning how, it's not often we see a trough with this kind of amplitude this time of year, but indeed we have it for later next week. And the question is whether it's going to time out with some kind of tropical system. That's the one that's coming off the African coast now. The GFS says no. The GFS says that trough bypasses it, and that this system may wind up tracking more to the west-northwest rather than be an impact up the coast. These are just, just open speculation at this point because we're so deep into the long range. But just very interesting to see a trough this deep, and behind it will be another shot of very cool early autumn air. Why don't we get really tight on the eastern half of the United States, and we'll send it back to the beginning. And there's a couple of things I want to point out that are important. So there's our nor'easter moving out. Here's the cold front that moves through here Thursday night. You see it right there, and there's the remnant low of Harvey. It's actually maintains a pretty well-defined low-level circulation here as it moves up into lower Ohio. Now, we have a setup that we almost, we see in the wintertime with a high up in New England, wedging down the Appalachians, a primary low that goes into southern Ohio, and then it's going to force maybe a bit of a secondary low on a warm front to develop to our south over Virginia. So that will bring up that rain here Saturday night into Sunday morning. One of the things that some of the models have been doing, and the European has been particularly bullish on this idea, and this is not good. Lower pressures are going to be evident in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico as we go into this weekend. So it's possible that we could see some kind of tropical system develop there. Now, it doesn't have to be anything monumental. It could even be just wind up being a tropical depression. That could be enough to bring in some more rain into southeast Texas and Louisiana. So this is something that we don't want to see. The GFS doesn't really develop this as that next deep trough comes along. By Wednesday or Tuesday night, Wednesday, we have another cold front approaching, and behind that is a big high with that big shot of cold air that we'll call it cold air coming into the northeast for later in the week. And of course, we start to see the reflection of what is the tropical system now off the African coast, which, if the GFS timing is correct, that trough's going to bypass it, and it may wind up moving more to the west. Long-term speculation, it ain't even there yet, so we don't even know how much of this is really going to develop. So that's all this is at this point. But we need to mention the fact that the models are indeed doing this. Let me show you the European here, because the European is different. First, I want to show you the surface pressures on the European. Now, let me just back it up. Here's the European for early next week, where it actually brings out another low in the southwestern Gulf. It has some kind of tropical system that it wants to take northeastward. And now here's the reflection of the tropical system off the African coast. Now, why is this different than the GFS? Well, it's how the models are handling the next trough, because they handle it differently. All right, so here is the upper air for the European at the end of next week. And for those of you who have watched some of these videos, I've pointed out the fact that, in order to get something to come up the East Coast, you need to establish a strong southerly flow of some kind in the east. And this is what the European has done now for several days, although it takes longer, it seems, with every run. But there's the European's trough with a very vigorous upper air storm in the Great Lakes. And if you have this, which I'm not saying you will, you wind up taking something up the coast just offshore. The problem is that the models are timing everything differently. Here's the GFS's view. See, the GFS is faster with that trough and has already kicked it out. And that's going to make a huge difference, because if that's the case, then there's nothing to pick it up, which leaves any tropical system under the influence of the Atlantic Ridge, which you see it here. Here's the Atlantic Ridge, and that would force a more westward component of motion. These things get so complicated over time. It's really, almost futile to kind of look at this when you get into the long range. But at least you know what what we're dealing with. We have this high amplitude pattern with these deep troughs coming through, and it's a question of how things time out. The GFS says there's no issue here because the trough is long gone, and the European says no. The European digs this thing much deeper and much further south. So we're going to have to look and see, which model has the better idea on this. When we go to the Atlantic view, because I want to show you how the models handle this tropical system. And of course, we have tropical tidbits getting so much traffic that it's suddenly not responding. All right, we'll give it another shot here. Let me see if I can go backwards. All right, let's try it again. Let's go to regions. There we go. Seems like everybody's getting on tropical tidbits at the same time. That's good for Levi, but it's not switching over. Nope, I'm having some problems here, folks. I'm not going to be able to do it. All right, so you know what? Let's we'll stop it here. We'll take your questions and comments and discuss them a bit further, and we will maybe between the time this runs and maybe between the time this runs and. Okay, so you should see me now. And by the way, let me just show you what I got here, okay? Hang on. Hang on. I don't know if you guys can see this, but this is my dinner. It's a 12-pound pork shoulder, and it's been cooking in my oven for 10 hours. So now it's just got to sit here for about a half hour and 45 minutes, and then I take the fork and I pull it apart, and that's it. So if you actually, I think I have a pulled pork YouTube up somewhere. So if you are interested in how to make an easy pork shoulder, go ahead and do so. Cyan, thank you for hitting the super chat. I really appreciate it, by the way. Let's see, a couple of just a couple of just side notes here. The tropics are going to be an issue going into the next 10 days. I think that's pretty clear. We have the system off the African coast, and we're dealing with that, and at the same time we're dealing with a very high amplitude pattern over North America. So that's something we're going to have to be very careful of. It may have some consequences. It may not. It could also, if things time out, we could wind up with another storm that winds up turning offshore and not being any big problem. On the other hand, if things time out differently, you could wind up with tracks further west. Of course, now the added complication with the models, particularly the European, trying to develop another tropical system in the western Gulf of Mexico, which is the last thing that we need. Did Harvey come out further into the Gulf than expected? Are you talking, if you're meaning when it came out offshore? I don't know. I kind of thought it would. I didn't really, this was one of those things where I guess any outcome would not have been a surprise if it had gone further west, which is what they usually like to do. So, models, I think, did a pretty good job overall. They, after a while, because you look at so many of them, you start to get dizzy, and your brain swells. You don't even, it's so hard to comprehend all of it all at once. But I think models did a very good job. I think the Hurricane Center did an outstanding job with this. I mean, it was pretty clear from Wednesday and even before that this was potentially a catastrophic event, and it was telegraphed forecast-wise. I just don't know how do you prepare for 50 inches of rain. I just don't know. I mean, honestly, if somebody said that to me and I was not knowledgeable on weather, that'd be a very hard thing to accept. The floods of Noah are coming your way. You're going to get 4 feet plus of rain in a handful of days. I don't know that that's comprehensible. But they did the best job I think that they could do, and it was an excellent job, and we should, kudos to them. Let's see. Delvin, so you looked at the North Atlantic 500 anomaly. So tell me what you think that what does that tell you? I'd be curious, what you think about this. Raymond, I expect the Canadian model to be slamming the East Coast because I'm used to seeing it from that model and not the European. Well, the Canadian today did what it usually does, except instead of having one tropical system in the Atlantic, it has 3. So, I mean, just why not? But it has the same idea as the European. Sometimes you have to look a little bit beyond what the model is actually you have to look literally beyond what the model's actually printing and look more at the scheme of the upper air. And remember, we said earlier this week, with regards to what it was doing along the East Coast with slamming hurricanes up the eastern seaboard, when we looked at the upper air of the Canadian, it did not make sense with what has been the case all summer long and with what the other models were doing. So if you're new to this, you kind of need to start looking at models in sort of a broader perspective and not necessarily looking at the individual printout. We can all see what the models print out, but it's more important to get a sense of what the upper air pattern is in order to really get an edge on your forecast. Okay, so Cyan, you want to know, could it reach Florida if the ridge doesn't move? Well, yes. I mean, that's one of the consequences. With respect to the big ridge off the Atlantic, I think that's going to be one of the keys with this tropical wave. Is there a weakness somewhere that's going to allow it to recurve out before it gets to 60 west? Is the ridge, as shown on the European, so strong that it'll just keep forcing it more westward with time? Is it like the late afternoon GFS, which times the troughs out differently, and you wind up with something that eventually gets nosed into the eastern Gulf of Mexico? Too many questions going forward to reach any conclusions other than that we know that something is coming east of the Cabo Verde Islands, that conditions are favorable for development. In fact, one of the things that I noticed this afternoon, and I'll punch it up for you. I want to go to the water vapor imagery, okay? And, there was, earlier today, a big upper low in the Atlantic. Well, look what's happened. It's weakened considerably. So I think that's going to create certainly the less hostile conditions. And if it keeps weakening like this, we may get favorable conditions across the Atlantic. And you can see the edge now, this large tropical wave that has moved off the African coast and is passing over the Cabo Verde Islands. It is very well developed. There is, certainly has that curvature to it. There might even be some sort of mid-level circulation already there. So the Hurricane Center has got this at an 80% chance of developing into a tropical depression or tropical storm over the next, I think 70% for the next 2 days. And no, I'm sorry. You know what? Why don't I just check? Because the new forecast should be out there. Let's take a look. I'm going to take a look real quick. And 90% now, Hurricane Center continues to become better organized, and the formation of a tropical depression in the next day or two, 90% chance in the next 48 hours, 90% chance in the next 5 days as it tracks on to the west or west-northwest. So the Hurricane Center is certainly growing bullish on it. And again, why not? Because this upper low disappearing, you can see here's Harvey and here's the nor'easter going out. So at least temporarily, we have an upper low in the eastern half of the Gulf of Mexico. So that will create some hostile conditions for a couple of days. But we're going to have to see where that goes. If that moves westward into Mexico, it could open the door into the southwest Gulf. So here's I got the Eastern Atlantic loop here, so we can take a look at that wave. And you can see how well defined it's become during the afternoon here. And there's just passing the Cabo Verde Islands and moving on a west-northwest coast. It's a very big system, and I would not be surprised if this system is a tropical depression tomorrow, and maybe even a tropical storm by the time we get to Thursday. So the tropics are going to be something we are going to continue to pay close attention to going into the holiday weekend and into next week. I'm sorry, Raymond, I haven't been back. I got to go back and look at all my messages. It's sort of hard to figure this out. I'm all over the place this evening, but I will take a look. Cyan, I live in Florida, so trying to know when I should prepare and the possibility. Well, I'm sorry, East Coast or West Coast? Because that makes a difference to some degree. Pandez, I'll get you to your question in a second. Okay, so I'll wait for Cyan to respond. So, yeah, East Coast or West Coast? East Coast. Okay, I would kind of, it's out there. I don't think you have to worry about it now, but over the weekend you might want to pay attention, and I'm sure you're going to be paying attention over the next couple of days. Why does this stuff come off Africa? Well, you've got east to west trade winds that blow south of 25 to 20 degrees north, so the flow as you get closer to the equator is more east to west, and you get these waves of low pressure that move off the African coast, and from early August to late September, early October, what we call the Cabo Verde season, that is when we get these strong tropical waves that move off, and some years they can be especially active and develop into tropical storms pretty far out in the Atlantic. So that is the same how it is for the Eastern Pacific off the west coast of Mexico on the Pacific side. That is the Atlantic's version, is the African coast. And we watch those systems come out and move across. Cyan says, we get flooded for 30 minutes of rain where I live. I have no doubt. And, when it rains in Florida, it can really pour. But keep tabs on the weather over the weekend. You certainly don't have anything to worry about over the next few days. David Schwartz, parents are on the east coast of Florida, luckily far enough inland that they avoid any storm surge. Oh, yeah, well, that's definitely a good thing. Delvin, 998 millibar CMC 977 Euro 950. You can't trust the long range. Okay, but what you should get out of that is the fact that all three models have something. Let's forget the intensities for a minute. The European has a major hurricane. The CMC has a Cat 1, Cat 2. GFS has a tropical storm, but all three have something. Now, the GFS specifically, maybe I didn't look at the specific track. It might be too close to the islands, and maybe that's why its pressures are higher. The European has a well-developed system. So maybe the European is threading it just far enough north of the islands where the islands have no impact, and at the same time the upper air is extremely favorable, and the CMC is somewhere in between. But they all have something. So that right there tells you that it's pretty reliable that something is going to be there. What exactly, we don't know. Steve Audrey, no hurricanes form in the ITCZ. In the ITCZ, so, well, you do have, waves that eventually can become tropical storms and hurricanes between 10 north and 20 north when they gain enough latitude. If they're too close to the equator, these disturbances, when they're that close to the equator, then no. It's very rare to have a tropical system down around, say, 5 north, although we saw that earlier this year with Brett, and I think there was one or two others in the last 5 or 10 years or so where we had some unusually far south systems. National Hurricane Center, Frank Sullivan, NOAA weather, love it, best Canada model is all-time best. Thank you, Joe. Okay, you got the big Canadian model fan there from Frank Sullivan. You're guaranteed for the Canadian model to wipe out a few, at least one coastline a day. How much rain with the Harvey leftovers? That depends. I think west of the Appalachians, it could be a little more substantial. Some of it might get lost as it translates east, but I think it depends on how much of a core holds or stays together as it moves eastward. Sometimes the cores fall apart as they cross the mountains. sometimes they hold together very well if there's a strong enough disturbance aloft to give it support, and that trough swinging around has some punch to it, so maybe the trough will energize it a little bit as it comes eastward. We're going to have to see how the shorter-term models handle it as we get a bit closer. Delvin says, I remember the comment about someone's pool, and they said it went from 92 to 77, so no development for this pool. That's right, pool upwelling. You know, I'm probably down to about 75 or 4 now with what we had today here with temperatures just in the low 60s. Marquise, do I think the CMC and Euro is right about the development of a hurricane near the Bahamas? I think the models are correct in something going to be out there. What it will be exactly, I don't know. I think we need to get a little bit closer into the short range to figure out just exactly what we have. And until we do, I don't think it's something that we should be, you know, fretting over, certainly. But just know that the pattern is active and that the tropics are going to be an issue. Yes, Delvin's correct. Way too far out. We're talking, you know, well deep into the first week of September, and here we are. We're still, you know, finishing up the last days of August. So let's keep some perspective here, okay? And also, you know, you're going to see stuff pop up over the next number of days about this. Please try to keep a perspective in mind of where, you know, people that do that sort of thing, you know, putting up, you know, maps of, you know, long range with a hurricane striking a certain coastline and making a deal about it 10 days in advance. 99% of the time, the model's not going to be correct. So, you know, they're doing it for their own reasons. And it's not meteorology that's being practiced there. What would you say we could have a bigger picture about where that low is going? I think by the, you know, maybe over the weekend we could probably get a clue. Okay, but we're going to have to see how the upper air evolves. Marquise is going to the Bahamas. All right, well, then I think, Marquise, you're getting a heads up that you're going to have to pay a little bit close attention to the busy tropics that are out there. But I don't, again, until something is actually tangibly there and you know that there's a risk, I wouldn't lose sleep over it now. Okay. All right, folks, it was a good chat tonight. I really enjoyed it. I am Cyan, yes, I'm sure we all do. I totally understand what you're saying. Yes, Delvin, of course, live stream tomorrow. Back to work for me tomorrow, so I think we'll do the live stream probably around 11 a.m. Eastern time, okay? And that'll be the one that I will do for the day probably, at which point at least things will be calm enough where we can go to one live stream a day until we get to the weekend when we're probably going to wind up doing two live streams a day if the tropics are cooking again. I welcome all your questions. I really enjoy that you guys are coming here on a regular basis. And, you know, I hope the audience continues to grow. It's a really good thing. Thank you for those of you who hit the super chat. I really appreciate that very much. And Pandaz, I know you were asking about the winter, so in case you missed it, I'm not big on the long range. It's just not my thing. I also don't have a good feel for looking at stuff in September and trying to draw a conclusion for the winter because in my experience over the many years, you know, I've seen patterns that set up in September, October, November that would mean for a really snowy, cold winter, and then suddenly you get into December and you got a ridge in the east. So it's very hard. Some people are very good at it. Some people are quite good at it and can wrap their head around it. I have never been able to do that. Carter Duche, what is the 1,000th number on the 1,000 number on the hurricane/tropical storms? Okay, I assume you're looking at, when you say that, if you're looking on a map and you see the 1,000, that's in millibars. So that's a pressure. That is the pressure measured in millibars, okay? So if you see 950, that's 950 millibars, which I think is down around 28 inches. I used to know the exact translations, but, you know, like I said, I'm almost 60 years old. There's less and less stuff that I'm remembering. But a millibar's translated to inches. 1,012 millibars is 2992, okay? So that's kind of where the standard is. Yeah, we use millibars because it's a universal number. Everybody uses millibars around the world on all their maps, so everybody's on the same page. That's why we use Greenwich Mean Time, so that everybody is on the same page. The ranges, well, in a Category 5 hurricane, you could see pressure down around 900 or 890, or in some rare cases even 880 or 870. You know, a normal high pressure would be, you know, this time of year would be 1020, 1025. You know, you can push it maybe up to 1026 or 7 on the strong side. You get into the winter, you start seeing highs maybe 1050, 1055 or higher. You know, storms usually in the 990s and 980s. Hurricanes usually 980 or less. Category 2s, you know, you get into the 960s. Category 3s when you start to get into the 940s. HPA, not millibars. Okay, I'm sorry, you're confusing me, Stephen. I'm not sure. I think he's talking about pressure with the you know, with the 1,000 there. What does 28 exactly was 28 inches mean on a barometer? Well, if you get a home barometer, 28 inches of mercury. So that's a measure of pressure. The normal pressure is the normal, quote unquote, 29.92. Okay, would be a normal barometric pressure. Let's call it an average mean pressure. So 28 inches means your barometer mercury is at 28 inches, so that the barometric pressure is very low. At 28 inches, that's really low. That's big. That's big storm. All right, folks. Now we're going to leave it there. Okay. Have a great rest of your evening. Oh, hectopascals is not millibars. Okay, you're right. I'm sorry. Correct, Steve Addy. I'm sorry. You are correct. I'm just talking about in terms of, you know, the pressures. If he's looking at 1,000 millibars on the map, they're looking at you know, he's looking at the standard, you know, weather maps on the models. They're all pressured, you know, they're all millibars on there. All right, 900 millibars is 26.5. Very good. Okay, now we're going to say goodbye. Have a great rest of your Tuesday evening. I'm going to have some dinner, and we will talk to you tomorrow.